since it has been 2 weeks, we're going to recap what we covered in the last session, and I'll give you a quick rundown of the topic areas for today. And just as a reminder, we are recording this session. So if you turn on your camera or unmute yourself, we will take that as permission that you gave us permission to record you. And our intent is to put the recordings up onto the FHWA Virtual Public Involvement website as a resource, both for you and any others who may find the discussions and topics that we covered today useful. So without any further ado, Kevin Mccoy with the USDOT Volpe Center, part of the Volpe Center team who is supporting us today, will bring up some points from the last session.
All right, good morning, Lana. Let me just share my screen here for a second as those of you who are with us for day 2, and hopefully that was almost all of you, might remember we did a poll at the end of the day just asking what people thought were some of the key takeaways from day 2. And the one that rose to the top was, I think, a really useful anecdote from one of our partners here, one of the local and kind of regional planning partners, about reaching people where they are, and in New England, that sometimes is the transfer station or the dump. That's kind of like a maybe outside the box example of trying to take advantage of places that people are already going, making it easy for them to participate. So that was the number one, because I think it was such an interesting anecdote, but also kind of further down the list here, lots of great thoughts here about needing to customize outreach efforts, not think that everything is going to be kind of a one size fits all approach. People thought there were lots of great examples in the last day of how to include and engage, lots of great tools featured. Several people thought that VPI is best viewed as a supplement to traditional engagement measures, not as a complete replacement for in-person public involvement, and that the budget, time, and expense to put in the effort to meet all the people where they are is worth it or is important. Again, meeting people where they are, that was a kind of a theme throughout. And I'm not sure that it says it here, but I think also it came up that sometimes where people are is online, and so that kind of reinforces the need to have VPI as part of the toolbox. Mentioning the Community Transportation Leaders Program, which was brought up in one of the presentations, that public involvement has to look as different as the community looks. And again, using varied techniques, not a one-size-fits-all approach. And then, just some other kind of nice kind of thoughts here. These ones weren't voted up, but they're all still important. One here near the bottom, that lots of techniques are to consider, recognition of the needs of people with disabilities, such as deaf or having visual disabilities or language barriers. With that, I'll turn it back to Lana. And also, while I'm doing that, I'll put the agenda for today up on the screen so we can reference that.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And so in day 1, we sort of talked about different ways of conducting virtual public meetings and how to advertise those types of events and get engagement. In session 2, we drilled down into the topic of using virtual public involvement techniques to engage traditionally underserved communities. Today, we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into 2 specific techniques that you can add to your virtual public involvement toolbox. And those include project visualizations. And Jim Talley from the Federal Highway Administration's Eastern Federal Lands Highway Division will be presenting on that topic with us. And then we'll have Zach Whitney from the Utah Department of Transportation presenting on the use of or the creation of do-it-yourself videos. And he'll be helping and facilitating us in an interactive exercise where you can actually practice working through planning some like a storyboard for the videos. And so we have a packed agenda today. I hope you're ready to be engaged and to participate. And without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Jim Talley. Jim, are you with us? Let me just double check. I do see Jim is here, but I'm not hearing you or seeing you, Jim.
Lana, given that maybe Jim needs a few more minutes to get ready to go here, maybe we could invite everyone to, if you have any takeaways of your own from the first 2 days, maybe you'd like to share those, you could raise your hand and unmute you, and we can get a little bit of a kind of group conversation going about what we learned in the first 2 days, or any questions that are still on your mind, things that weren't answered yet in those first 2 days. Anybody have any insights for the group while we're getting Jim ready to go?
Feel free to type something into the chat pod as well.
Anything that's been kind of on your mind over this last 2 weeks since we had a break? Something that you've been stewing on that you're hoping to get back to? And folks, we have heard from Jim. He's still getting set up. He needs a few more minutes. So good opportunity for us to just kind of circle back up and make sure we're on the same page here.
We also may have some different participants today than we had in the first or second days. So if you're new to joining us today, feel free to go ahead and type in your name and your agency and also your position or what you do there into the chat pod. I see that Mac Frost had raised his hand. Mac, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna, first of all, morning, everyone. I guess the thing that caught my attention over the past 2 days was the use of the PIMA tool and really the ability to, track and feedback from public comments and, making sure that's all in one-stop shop, one place. I think is really helpful. I've been hearing some good reviews from it from multiple states. So I think that's something that's really, caught my attention that can, increase engagement and increase the effectiveness of the public involvement, especially the virtual public involvement that we do. So I think that's something that really caught my attention.
Great, thanks, Mac. I also see JB Mac. Were you preparing to say something? You're still muted.
No, sorry, I just joined. I didn't mean to raise my hand or anything. Sorry about that.
Great, no problem. So it seems like maybe then this is everybody was here in the previous sessions because I'm not seeing any new introductions showing up in the chat pod. I'll also invite everyone in preparation for the more interactive parts of the session today. If you want to practice turning on your camera or unmuting to say something, making sure that your camera and microphone connections are working, feel free to do that now as we're just waiting for Jim to set up. So thank you for introducing yourself, Tanya. I see you're with VTrans and you're a research engineer.
And that's actually another good reminder, Lana, is that we do have this interactive session later after the break, and everyone should have received materials for that via email yesterday from Jacob Korn from Volpe Center. But if for any reason you didn't receive that, just type your email address into the chat and we'll make sure that we forward that to you now so you'll have it by the time we get to that part of the agenda. I'm also going to drop it into the chat, but I'm not confident that guests will be able to access the file. So I'll do that, but if it doesn't work for you, don't worry, we'll send it to you again.
We have Cassie from the Massachusetts Division Office. And Peter Rocatera from Connecticut DOT, welcome.
I think we had someone just join on the phone. Is that correct? The person who joined on the phone, if you could mute your phone so we don't get the background noise, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm curious, Tanya Miller, as a research engineer, do you do a lot of public involvement? Is this a newer topic for you?
Yes, it is. But we, the research section runs a symposium every September for VTrans. And the last 2 years it's been virtual. It will be virtual this year as it was last year. So it's helpful to get a few tips on how to get a little bit more engagement online.
Great. Thank you so much for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
It's good to know that the information that we're sharing today goes beyond, sort of our traditional sort of planning and environmental review processes, and can be used by other folks as well. And I do see some email addresses being provided in the chat. So if, as Kevin said, you hadn't yet received the worksheets that we'll be using later on today, please do put your email address into the chat pod so we can make sure that you receive a copy. I missed, so I see Charles Tettleman with the Kennebec Valley Council of Governments in Maine. Thank you. Thank you and welcome. All right, and I'm just confirming for James Vio, Josh Lacar, and Maureen Mullaney that your cameras are working. So we'll be starting with Jim Talley in a moment or two. I'm sure Jim will also be introducing himself, but I've had the pleasure of working with Jim in the Eastern Federal Lands Highway Division. We actually sat in cubicles next to one another. We used to pass notes across the cubicle wall. And so Jim is a highway engineer, but he's also taught himself, mainly self-taught, how to do visualizations. And so he's going to talk about really the entire spectrum. If you're ready to get started but don't really know how, and you don't have a huge budget for expensive software, Jim will tell you how he got started and talk about some free options that you can use. But he'll also introduce you to some of the more Cadillac versions that you can use to produce visualizations. And so without any further ado, I'll turn things over to Jim. Jim, your microphone doesn't seem to be connected just yet. Still don't hear you. Keep trying.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Said I was unmuted, but apparently that was a lie. Okay, so let me share my screen. Let me know when you all can see that.
Yes.
Good, okay. Okay, well, apologies for the technical difficulties this morning and just needing a few minutes to get everything ready. Like Lana said, my name is Jim Talley. I'm an engineer and the design visualization specialist for the Eastern Federal Lands Highway Division. And yes, Lana and I used to sit next to each other, and she's welcome to come back anytime. As she knows, I give her a hard time about it whenever I have the chance. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about today, I'll go into a little bit of background on the Federal Lands Highway Program, kind of what my definition of visualization is, how I got started, some of the different types of visualization that I do, and then we'll walk through a sample demo. So the Federal Lands Highway Program is part of the Federal Highway Administration, and we sort of act as a mini DOT for other federal agencies that own and manage their own lands. So for example, the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service. Out west, we have Bureau of Reclamation, Bureau of Indian Affairs, those sorts of agencies. And so basically they kind of hand off their road maintenance, design, construction, asset management, and maintenance to us. And so part of that is working in the national parks. There's an attention to detail and aesthetics. We can't just, slap in a concrete bridge. It's got to be context sensitive. It's got to lie lightly on the land. It's got to look nice, and it's kind of has to match the culture of the landscape that it's sitting on. So that being the case, in terms of visualization, when we're visualizing a new project, our partner doesn't just want to see that there's going to be a bridge. They want to see what the stone's going to look like. They want to see, the colors of the bridge. They want everything to be as close as possible to what it's actually going to look like. So in terms of visualization, it's kind of like visualization in hard mode and challenge mode, but it also makes it kind of fun, kind of challenging. It's not, your normal regular roads and bridges. It's, more interesting stuff. So as far as visualization, at some point as I started doing this, I kind of thought to myself, I kind of went back to the fundamentals. And I found this definition on Wikipedia, so we all know it has to be true. But I really kind of like this one because it says any technique to communicate a message. And that really kind of spoke to me because, if you're, pre-COVID, you were, out to lunch with a colleague, sitting there and you were trying to explain some kind of idea, you kind of pull out a napkin and a pen and sketch something up, and that itself is a visualization. And I've actually done that and just did it this past weekend, and it kind of, while I was going through this, kind of reminded me of that. So visualization can be anything that takes, some concept that you want to explain or some message that you have to communicate, and it communicates it to someone else in a way that they can understand it. So it can be anything from, sketches, graphics, renderings, animations, but it doesn't, a lot of people, I think of a visualization as, oh, that's a rendering, that's an animation, it's really expensive. It doesn't have to be. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we go on here. So a little bit about how I got started. This is actually the first project I worked on as a designer, fresh out of college, and it was a gravel road, entrance road, and a gravel parking lot with a boat ramp and a dock and a chemical restroom and a few other things. So I worked on the design for this project for a few months, and then we had our first meeting with the partner, which was Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we drove, the 5 hours down to this refuge and, sat in the meeting room and looked at the project and looked at the plans. And they said, they started shaking their heads and said, we just don't like this. And we said, okay, well, what would you like us to change? What would you like us to do differently? And they said, well, you're the engineers, you tell us. So we said, okay, we went back to the office, we designed something else, made some modifications, tweaked a few things. A few months later, we had our second meeting with them. We went back, sat down, they started shaking their heads and, yeah, we just don't like this. We said, okay, well, what do you want us to change? And they said, well, we don't know. You tell us, you're the engineers. Okay. So this went on a couple more times, and every meeting they would invite a few more people. So there was like the regional folks, there was the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. At one point, and this probably should have been a red flag, at one point they actually, I think, hired a consultant to review our plans and I guess kind of explain it to them. So eventually this goes on for a little while and they decide they're going to have a public meeting and they're going to invite everybody. So they invite, the commercial fishermen that use the boat ramp, the recreational boaters, the Friends of the Refuge group. And if any of you have ever, worked with them, those folks are very passionate about, their refuge. So in the days leading up to this meeting, I'm just dreading it. Every meeting, up to this point had been getting more and more contentious. We were just getting everybody was getting really frustrated. So before this meeting, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be awful. I got to do something. So I decide, pretty much at the last minute, I add some color to the plans. So I filled in some color. I took our 3 options that we were working on. I blew them up poster size, took them with me to this meeting, and amazingly, shockingly, this public meeting with, all these probably 50 to 100 people was less contentious than any of the previous meetings had been. And so that was kind of an aha moment for me. And talking to the refuge manager afterwards, she said something that has stuck with me even 20 years later. She said, we're biologists, we don't read plans. And I kind of thought to myself, up to this point, fresh out of college as a new designer, I had been so focused on how do I design a set of plans that's biddable and constructible, it didn't even occur to me to think that I might have to try to explain it to somebody. So at that point, I kind of said to myself, maybe there's something to all this visualization stuff, and I kind of started getting involved with it. Our visualization specialist at the time, I happened to bump into him one day in the break room and just started asking him questions. And I think he got kind of annoyed with me because he gave me a book and he said, here, kind of just work your way through this, and this is like the basic of visualization. So I worked my way through that book and I went back to him and he gave me another book. Went back to him again after that book and then, worked my way through a few more things. And gradually over the next 10 years, I think he kind of saw that I wasn't going to go away. So he started getting me a little more involved in things. And then around 2015 is when I took over as the visualization specialist. So, whoops, that went the wrong way. So my background is in civil engineering. I don't have a formal education in visualization. Like Lana said, I'm mostly self-taught. And at the time that I was learning this, it was back when YouTube wasn't quite what it is today. Today you can go on there and, YouTube or one of the other sites and you can find a tutorial for pretty much anything. That wasn't the case back then. There was still some stuff out there, but it was books and it was looking for it. So the point is it's much easier to learn these kinds of tools and techniques and software applications today than it was 10 years ago. Not only that, but the applications themselves are going to be a lot easier to use, which I'll kind of show you a little later. So really, if I could learn this 10 years ago on my own while working full time, really anybody can do this. So as far as the types of visualization, I kind of group them into 2 main buckets, the 2D and the 3D. And, there again, they can be simple, they can be complex, they can be low cost, they can be expensive. Kind of runs the gamut from, the most expensive renderings and animations to cheap or free. Really, there's a lot of different tools out there that you can use. And what I tend to do is I kind of look at the project, look at who the audience is, and then kind of pick the tool that best fits whatever that project is. So as far as the 2D maps, these are pretty simple. This is something, the one I just showed. It's as simple as adding some color to a set of plans. And it kind of, it seems pretty simple, but really, when you add color to the plans like this, the human eye can pick out things like the water, the grass, the parking lot, much easier than you can with just a black and white, plan sheet. And I've kind of found in the past that the more time someone has to think about something or to try to figure it out, the more time there is for them to, have some angst about it. So the quicker and easier you can communicate your message, I think the better it is just for everyone, really, for you and for your audience. So
Jim,
along the same line, yeah.
could you unshare and reshare your presentation? It seems like a bunch of people have lost your visuals.
Oh, did we lose it? Okay.
Yeah, let's just reset it really quickly. And if after Jim reshares, you're still having trouble seeing the presentation, please, just quickly exit the meeting and log back in. That seemed to fix it for other folks last time. Okay, so Jim, I see your presentation again. Go ahead, thank you.
Good to go?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. So along the same lines, you can take a typical section or a side view of a project, and you can add some color, add some graphics, add, things like this to kind of liven it up to make the different elements sort of pop, and just to make it easier for really for anyone to understand it. Photo simulation, excuse me, involves taking an actual photo of an existing site, like this bridge project, and then adding in CAD models, or, it could be a generic model or just anything to show what the proposed is going to look like. So when you're looking at, this photo of the project, you can see we've taken out the existing bridge and then added in the new one. And it kind of gives you a better perspective than just the, colored plan sheets. And it's a bit more realistic than a rendering because it's the actual site. Not all animation is three-dimensional. This is a 2D animation that we did. On the right side of the screen, the bridge is being replaced. So we did an animation of the flow of traffic through the work zone. So if you were going, northbound, coming from the bottom of the screen, you can see where you need to go to head across the bridge and out toward the interstate. So we did an animation like this for each of the different phases of the project, and they took this to the public meeting to kind of show the public what the work zones will look like. And then here's a 3D rendering. This is for a planning study that we did in Georgia. And the concept for this was our partner was looking at options to realign the road off of the earthen dam there in the background. And so one of them was this bridge. And we went with 3D renderings in this case to kind of show them what the project would look like, but also to kind of show what the cut and fill limits would look like. Things that aren't as easy to show on a 2D plan sheet. So in this case, I meant to switch these slides around. In this case, this is an existing road and we were adding a multi-use trail bridge next to it. So, so the road, the culvert and everything was kind of already there, but modeling the bridge, in this case, our partner wanted to see not just the bridge itself, but what the colors on the bridge would look like. Because of the walkway itself, there were different color options. And then they wanted to see, how the piles would interact with the grouted riprap or how that would be installed. So these are the kinds of things that you can't necessarily show on a 2D plan sheet. So that's where 3D renderings come in. And then 3D animations are useful because kind of beyond a 3D rendering, they show how users are going to interact with the project itself. Are the boats going to be able to fit under the bridge? What's it going to look like with cars going over it? Kind of brings it to life a bit more than just the static image. The other great thing about 3D animation, we can now show different weather conditions and different times of the year. So I think many of you are in the New England area. You're probably familiar with October and the leaf peeping season. And in this case, this project was a new bridge going over an interstate. And we kind of wanted to show what it would look like in October during that popular time of year if you were to drive under the bridge. We also use animation to simulate how things are built. In this case, this was a new type of construction. This was another refuge project, a bridge crossing a wetland. And in order to minimize disturbance, they precast all of the bridge components off-site in a warehouse and then brought them out to the site and installed them by crane. So this animation was done for a mini documentary that was made about the project. And then virtual reality is something I started playing with right before the pandemic, so I haven't been able to get back into it. But essentially, virtual reality is just rendering out a 360-degree spherical image of the project so that as you watch the video or look at the image, you can take your mouse and kind of pan around inside the image to look at it from different angles. So it kind of gives you a new level of immersion in the project. And the other great thing about it that I've discovered is we actually, because this is just a link that's posted online, I took a sheet of QR codes to our first EDC summit, EDC 5 summit that we did, and kind of put them out on a table. People were able to come with their own smartphone and then just use a pair of cheap $15, I think they were like $15, $20 goggles here that you can see, and they can put their own phone into the goggles and use that to look around. So kind of immerse, allow your audience to immerse themselves in the project without having to spend hundreds of dollars on a, expensive VR setup. So like I said, I've only tried it once so far at the EDC Summit, but it went over really well. So someday, hopefully, if we get back to in-person public meetings again, I'm looking forward to playing with this a bit more. So I brought a couple of demos today. Actually, at the last conference I presented at before COVID, I decided to do a live demo, and it went over pretty well. It was actually at an airport conference center, so I took some imagery from that airport itself, kind of between the runways, and so I built a little park in between the runways, and everybody got a kick out of it. So I went and I kind of pre-recorded something. So this is all pre-recorded. But it's all simple stuff. It's not, it's nothing too terribly complicated. This was all done in real time. But essentially the concept that I went with here was We went to a planning meeting a few years back at another refuge, and it was one of those, they called it a design charrette, but basically they walked in with a, large aerial photo and they kind of spread it on the table and brought some tracing paper. And then we all got out our pencils and our scale bars and we kind of traced out, what we thought this parking lot would look like. But then I thought, what if we could take that kind of tracing that we had done and turn that into our visualization. So on that note, I'm going to bring up the videos I did. Let me know if you can't see these.
Jim, is there supposed to be a sound from the video as well?
No, there's no sound.
Okay, just double checking. Thank you.
Yeah. So in this case, we took our tracing,
Jim,
we brought it back.
I'm sorry, it looks like, at least for me, it's frozen. Are others seeing the video moving?
Not yet. I see the Federal Highway Administration Triskelion, but the screen hasn't advanced yet. Jeremy.
Okay. Let me reshare. Technical difficulties get you every time. Okay. See my screen?
Yes.
I don't think it was frozen for everyone because I'm able to see like a Photoshop screen or something right now.
Okay.
Yeah, this might be your GIMP, the GIMP screen. It did advance to that, so okay.
Okay. Can we see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So let me back up a little bit then. So what we're doing here, or what I did here, was I brought back my my tracing from the site visit from the project meeting and scanned it, brought it in here, and now I'm just going to add some color to it. Kind of along the same lines as what I did with the first map that I showed. And the great thing about photo editing software, this is actually open source software, but the great thing about photo editing software beyond like your basic, Microsoft Paint or whatever, is that with this you can use layers, and the layers are there on the right side. There's the list of them. But basically you can put different elements of your image on different layers so that you can interact with them kind of independently of each other. And I'm a big fan of doing that because I found that when I work on projects, things change. I get comments, I get, revisions, here's a revision to the base image. And without using layers, if I had, done all of my edits to the base image, I'd have to go back and redo everything. So I'm a huge fan of layers. Great time saver. So you can see I've got a timer going at the bottom, and I'm actually playing the video back a little more quickly. It's a little sped up. But the timer down there is in real time, so you can see how long this actually took me to do. So basically, I had some colors that I had kind of pre-selected off to the left there, and I'm just kind of adding some fill to these different shapes. So I did the parking lot, I did the buildings, and now did the parking lot, and I did the walkway. Now I'm adding the buildings. And you can see I can erase and manipulate the buildings without having to do without having to mess up anything underneath. And if I had a scale bar on this, I can actually turn on my grid, and I can actually resize the grid to match whatever the scale is, that was scanned in with the drawing. So I can be doing this, to scale, even though it's a photo editing program. So at
Hey
this
Jim,
point
is this
now,
Photoshop?
I'm sorry.
Is this Photoshop?
This is an open source kind of alternative to Photoshop. It's called Gimp,
Okay.
Gimp. See that? See my mouse whoops. But it's, yeah, up here. There we go. So now I'm using the clone tool, and what's great about the clone tool is you can see the little box on the right side. That's your kind of source, your source pixels, and then the box on the left side. Yeah. So that box there on the right side, that's your source. So you're essentially just copying pixels from one place to another. So once you get your one wheel stop drawn, you can use your clone tool and you can draw them anywhere else you need them. So it kind of makes life easier anyway. So once I get the first wheel stop drawn and drawn to whatever scale I need it, I can just add more anywhere else I want them. So at this point, assuming it's new construction, there'll probably be some kind of turf establishment around the edges. And I'm actually going to take the layer from my grass and put it under the parking lot, because whatever I do with the grass, it's only going to go to the edge of the parking lot. So parking lot, you can see it's kind of clipping off the edge of the grass. This is another program that I haven't had any formal education on. These are tips and tricks and techniques that I picked up from the guy that I was bugging for 10 years. So I added my grass, did some vinyl cleanup, and now I'll go to my border, which is kind of a standard border that I keep, handy, bring it in, use it for all my projects. And I kind of brought in the aerial photo, and now I took the image that I edited, brought it back in on top of the photo and scaled it. And so now I've kind of turned that into my 2D map. So I'm just, at this point, I'm adding my my beach access just to kind of connect my image to the rest of it. Adding in some text and labels for the buildings, and then shut off the grid. Don't forget to save, and we're done. And that was 11.5 minutes. Granted, I had some of this kind of set up ahead of time, but, and there you can see it was done in Gimp. Of course, the standard disclaimer that we have to put in, we don't endorse specific softwares. And really, we don't have to, because there's many options these days to do these things. Anything doing here can be done, regardless of whatever software you have. So this is another program that I use for 3D modeling. This is called Blender, and this one I'm actually 100% self-taught in. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm taking that 2D image that we just made, and I'm going to bring in some 3D content. And the 3D content is stuff that, in this case, I made it all myself. Kind of went online, the website for the rescue manufacturer, kind of looked at their plans and then modeled it myself. But there's plenty of places out there where you can find this stuff for cheap and sometimes even for free. People model things and just kind of post them on the internet for anybody to use. Another option for this is Sketchup, and they have their own 3D warehouse where they keep a lot of this content that you can grab and just use. So all I'm doing here really is taking that that 2D image, using it as a flat kind of base, and then just adding some 3D content on top of it. So you can, model your own 3D content. Like I said, you can get it from pretty much anywhere online. You can, find you have an intern or a person who likes doing this stuff, you can have them do it. You can do it in-house. Really, there's a few different ways to go about it. And a great tool that I like in here is called the array tool. And you can see I just used that. I took my first picnic table, used my array tool, and made the other three from that one. So if I need to go back and make a change to my picnic table, I only have to edit the first one, and the other three will reflect those changes. So now, of course, I have to add my trash can and my recycle bin. And again, I've got a timer running down here so you can see how long it actually took me to do this. I had all of the content kind of preloaded, so add a few more minutes for that, but really once I got going, it was pretty quick. And then again, for my fence, just using the array tool. It makes it nice only having to model one piece of fence or one picnic table or one wheel stop, and then just being able to make instant copies. So very easy to quickly go from 2D to 3D. And like I said, plenty of options out there to do this. It's really getting easier all the time. And this is kind of the fun part after, several days or weeks of modeling something, to just kind of play with the content. And again, using my array modifier for the wheel stops, and then just kind of rotating and adjusting. I did those to, whatever scale I wanted in my 2D drawing. So in my 3D model here, I can just kind of eyeball it and place it on top of my 2D lines. And you can see, even though the wheel stops looked right when I first placed them, they were actually a little higher than they should have been, which is, I don't know, kind of the weird thing about perspective is that some things can look right, but then you switch the view to a different view and suddenly it's, 10 feet off the ground. So now for trees, a couple of interesting things I do with trees, techniques that I've kind of figured out is the first thing I like to do is look at existing photos of the site and figure out what kind of trees they actually have. Not a tree expert by any means. I probably should take a class in that, but in this case, I'm just using pine trees. This project is kind of close to the beach, so probably wouldn't be pine trees. It would be, scrub trees or whatever. But in general, I try to look at the site, see what kind of trees they actually have, and then use something kind of similar. The other thing I do when I'm placing trees is I look at the aerial image, because you can see kind of where the clear spots are that don't have trees. And if you kind of concentrate your trees according to the aerial image, gives you a bit more realism in your final product. So you can see here about 12.5 minutes, and we've got a full 3D model. And then just a matter of rendering it out. I'll actually slow it down here. So what happens when you render it is, and this is, pretty much universal to any 3D software, is you'll have a light source, somewhere in your scene, and the software will trace points of light from that light source to all of your objects. And so when it's called ray tracing. So when a ray of light, hits part of your scene, the computer calculates, is it going to be fully lit? Is it going to be, in a shadow area? Is the light going to bounce? And how do you get your shadows? So the shadows are all calculated by those rays. And yes, a light does bounce, because backing up. If the light didn't bounce and you were standing under the picnic shelter, it would be completely black. But since you have some light under there and some shadows over here, the light kind of hits the ground and then bounces around inside underneath the structure and then casts a shadow. So the other kind of cool thing about 3D software that you can do is you can figure out, at certain times of day, you might want to show a certain time of day, you can figure out kind of the position of the sun based on the kind of the compass heading of the model. And then you can position your light source accordingly, and you can get, pretty realistic shadows. So this is the, our finished render, 13, almost 14 minutes. And so just like that, we went from a 2D graphic to a 3D rendered model. So let me go back to my presentation. So like I said, things are a lot easier now. The software is becoming more available all the time. There are plenty of different options to do, whether it's something like what I just did or other more complicated things. There's plenty of online training and tutorials. Like I said, the program I was just using, Blender, was 100% self-taught from online videos and tutorials and books and things like that. So I think a lot of times people see a 3D rendering or an animation and think, oh, that's impossibly expensive. It's too hard to do that. I can never pull that off. But not true at all. It's definitely a lot more accessible than it has been in the past. And for anyone looking to get started in visualization, or anyone from beginner starting out to if you're an expert, I started as the only visualization person at Eastern Federal Lands. I didn't really have anybody else to bounce ideas off of or to learn from or anything. So I've met a few different visualization folks from state DOTs, and we kind of started our own little working group. So we're each kind of working on our own. One of the states is just getting started. Another state's been doing it for a long time. So we've been able to kind of share knowledge back and forth. So if your state or your agency is doing your own visualization work or would like to do your own visualization work, if you'd like to become involved in this, definitely feel free to reach out to me and we'll get you on the list. We just had our second call last week. So we're kind of just getting going, just getting off the ground. but it's been great so far. We've been scheduling hour-long calls, and I think they're going to have to go to 2-hour calls because being visualization people, we spend the first 30 minutes doing show and tell. Everybody kind of showing off their work. So it's a lot of fun. And that is all I have. I think I have time for some questions. And there's my email if you think of anything later that you'd like to reach out and ask. I'm happy to talk visualization anytime. I love doing this stuff. So with that, I think we have time for some questions.
Thank you so much, Jim. Great presentation. I already see you have a hand raised from JB. So JB, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. James, that was a great presentation, really inspiring stuff.
Thanks.
I just was curious about with that last example that you were showing, can you talk a little bit more about how you present that information to the public? Does the software allow you, or is there software available that allows people to explore a 3D site on their own, say through a website or something like that? Or is it something where you need to present the information to the people directly?
Right. So in this case, the output from this is just going to be a still JPEG image or like a rendered video, but there are websites out there that will host that, and even the spherical video that I showed, there are sites out there that'll host that. Actually, this one I just put up on YouTube, but there are plenty of websites out there that are kind of set up for public involvement, and I think some of them are like real estate type websites. They have those virtual tours, but we started using those in for, you know, in this industry for presenting things online. So YouTube is a good option. That's kind of a default. There's plenty of others. But yeah, long story short, yes, there are plenty of options to show your work beyond just a JPEG that you email out. So yeah, good question.
And I see everyone, if you haven't yet responded to the poll everywhere question, you can either do this from your phone by sending a text message or to use your web browser at the link above. And so, Jim, I have a question that may be of several parts.
Okay. I've got time.
So, you know, there are, you know, free software packages that you can use to create design visualizations. And then, you know, there may be the commercially available ones that are, you know, quite expensive. In your experience, you know, in terms of getting started and ease of use, does free mean, I assume free means fewer features, but does that also mean it's easier to pick up? And is that really a good place to start if you know, if you want to get started? Is it just easier to learn from a free software than from one with all the bells and whistles? And I'm just thinking of, you know, like Adobe Illustrator, right? There's just so many things that it can do that the learning curve can be really quite intimidating. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So the cost of the software does not necessarily translate to how many features it has. Blender, the software that I just showed, is kind of an open source version, kind of similar to 3ds Max, which is now owned by Autodesk. But for a long time, that was kind of like the de facto standard for people doing digital models and graphic arts and that sort of thing. So Blender is it's open source, so it's free. It's done by a community. There's a whole community of people, programmers that support it. So it has a lot of features to it. It's fully featured. I mean, they've done entire movies from Blender, and the graphics on them looked amazing. So I would say it's not necessarily, I think the primary reason to get started with the free software is the risk. You know, you don't really, it doesn't cost anything to do it. So if you pick it up and, you know, if you say, oh, this is too hard, or, you know, I'm just going to contract this stuff out, or, you know, whatever, you haven't really lost anything. So as far as complexity, Blender is like a full-featured kind of software. And really in visualization in, you know, kind of the engineering transportation world, there's a couple of different types of software. There's like the Blender type software, which is like pure graphic arts. So there's not really much engineering there. There are dimensions, you know, you can create something, you know, this many meters long by this many meters wide, but there's no coordinate systems. There's, you know, like none of the engineering part of it. On the other side, there's the engineering software, which is, we'll say, fair at visualization. So there's kind of, you know, there's the heavy visualization and there's the heavy engineering. And there are different price ranges on, you know, kind of both sides. And then there's kind of the in the middle. And the one example that comes to mind is SketchUp. SketchUp is very basic. It's very easy to get into. It does cost a little bit of money though. I think it's like $400 a year or something like that. I don't remember, but they have like a 30-day demo of it that, you know, you can go and you can try it out. So, and there's like free versions, there's like different pricing levels, but SketchUp is a kind of a basic one that a lot of people get into, and it can give you some pretty good results. So there's all different levels of it. Price does not exactly equal, you know, what you're getting.
Great, thanks, Jim. So we're seeing this word cloud evolve as people are putting in their what they think of when they if somebody says project visualization. And you know, it's interesting. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but you know, the words understand and understanding are really large there and easy. And I think that really gets to your main point, Jim, right? Regardless of what tool you end up using, the goal of a visualization is really to help people more easily understand the information that you're trying to convey.
Exactly. And yeah, like I said, you know, talking to the refuge folks, them saying, you know, oh, we're biologists, we don't read plans. I mean, when you're in a public meeting, and I'm sure many of you know this, you don't know who's going to come to the meeting. It could be, you know, could be the smartest biologist in the world, but they can't read plans. You know, I could be a really good engineer, but I can't read, you know, I don't know anything about biology, or, you know, very little about biology. So the great thing about visualization is it allows you to kind of talk to almost anybody, you know, universally, and help them understand what you're trying to communicate.
So we have an interesting question here in the chat pod from Jeff McCullough. And he said, it's always nice to see people in visualizations. And so do programs like Blender offer visualizations of people that reflect diverse populations? I love that, you know, the little twist there about, you know, it's not just like one standard look to the people you kind of plop in there, but, you know, reflecting a diversity.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of software is out there. You can get content online that's, you know, cheap or even free, and you can place it in there, and that includes people. So people from all walks of life, as diverse or non-diverse as you want, really. I mean, there's plenty of options out there.
And it doesn't have to be a static person, right? If I recall from some of the show and tell presentations in the visualization work group, you have, you know, a person that you can sort of animate and have, you know, travel along a path that you've sort of drawn in your like rendering or whatever.
Yeah, the software that they were using for that was actually not one of the free softwares, but one of the things that Blender does is character animation. So if you really want to, it's a little bit tougher. You have to, it's almost kind of like taking a skeleton of a person and kind of manipulating it, and then, you know, setting the frames and that sort of thing. So doing it by hand gets a little tricky, but You know, cars are pretty easy. You just take your car and you put it in one place at one frame and then have it in another place at another frame, and the computer interpolates in between. So it's doable, yeah. But some of the programs, you know, like the one that you saw, come with some pre-made, pre-animated content.
So Jamie made an interesting point that you know, you could probably get pets in there as well, and
Oh, yeah.
that leads me to another question, Jim. And you and I have talked about this a little bit, but in terms of an appropriate level of detail, because you know, you can do a very basic, even like a very basic 3D model. You don't have to put textures on the buildings. You didn't even have to do the sort of light source shadow modeling at the end. So, you know, what are your thoughts on an appropriate level of detail for different applications?
I think that's a good point. It's kind of a judgment call because, you know, if you put so much, like if you have a bridge project and you put so much content on the bridge that you can't see the textures that you're, you know, of the walls, you know, on the abutments, you're going to get some comments on that. And it's going to be kind of too cluttered. So, you know, I mean, same with the trees. When I'm putting in trees, I look at the aerial image to see where the trees are on the actual site. But when I'm doing my model, I'm not going to put trees absolutely everywhere because they might cover up something else that I need my audience to see. So I would say, you know, definitely don't clutter up the image with a lot of stuff that's, you know, not gonna be helpful in terms of context. But at the same time, it's good to have some things in there because, you know, it does give some context. It gives some scale. Like when you have cars and people, it helps people to kind of visualize the sizes of things. And I also, you know, speaking of pets, I like to throw a little Easter egg in here and there. You know, like I had a person walking their bulldog across one of the bridges, you know, like that sort of thing. It's kind of fun.
So we do have a couple of other poll everywhere questions to get people sort of thinking a little bit more. And Kevin, if you would pull up the next one about what kinds of visualization techniques do you hope to put into practice? This is going to be a multiple choice question. So Jim has demonstrated a couple. He's talked about several more. Which are the ones that you're most interested in using for your agency? Or which are the ones you find to be most cool? Okay, so I think that's really telling that adding color to construction drawings, that seems to be the most popular one at the moment as the results are coming in, which makes sense because that's the simplest one, but it really has quite an impact.
Yeah, there's a lot of bang for your buck there.
Okay, so the cut paste photo editing. So 3D rendering is the second most popular, most interest though, but now it's still edging ahead. So the 3D renderings, you know, very impressive as, you know, in terms of visualization techniques. But not as much interest in the virtual and augmented reality.
Lana, I'm curious about that. I'm curious to hear from folks why that is. Is it just something that seems kind of too difficult or scary, or does anybody have any thoughts about, you know, or do you just think it might not be as an effective technique? Any thoughts on that from the group?
Scott put rendering into the chat pod. Scott, do you want to talk about this image that you just shared?
Sure, Lana. That's for a bridge project we're doing, and we're doing some amenities for the local communities and wanted to do some renderings to show them what it would look like. And we have people in there. This was not a free software we used. We worked with a company to help us work with that.
Thanks. So I see a comment in response to Kevin's question in the chat pod. If my little email reminder thing would stop covering. So Connie Reed said, virtual and augmented reality may require additional investment and the cost for the goggles. So maybe there's perceived increased cost barrier there. Although I think as Jim was saying, almost everyone has a smartphone these days, and so he had a QR code to share that people could use to bring up whatever 3D augmented reality rendering video, and so then you would just slot it into sort of the frame of the goggle. So you don't have to purchase very expensive goggles. I think, Jim, you were saying something in the range of like 10 or 15 bucks.
Yeah. Those were, like $10 or $15. And really, I mean, you don't even have to have that. You can just kind of have the QR code out there. People can go to it with their smartphone and just kind of, point to their smartphone screen and just kind of like, pan around if they want. So really, doesn't have to be a huge investment, and a lot of the softwares that are out there will render a 360 spherical image.
Jim, did you have a link to the one that we used for the Southeast Connecticut COG peer exchange?
Which one?
I seem to remember that we had a QR code that we were sharing with the participants there that they could put onto their cell phone. It's all right if we don't have one, but Kevin, let's bring up the next poll question. So, we, Federal Highway Administration, the EDC 6 Virtual Public Involvement team, would really like to know what kind of help you think your agency needs most in order to advance the use of visualizations. And if there's more context to your response than you want to type, please feel free to unmute and contribute to the conversation. So Andrea, project funding, that is a big one. And you may have seen some notices go out recently about the aid demonstration grant funding, the notice of funding availability or funding opportunity. And so we do have some programs at the Federal Highway Administration to support the implementation of innovations like virtual public involvement, like project visualizations. And so that is one. The other is the STIC grants. And so definitely keep an eye out for those notices when they're accepting applications, because they can be used. You can submit an application, for some sort of either VPI pilot project or something along those lines. So yes,
I'm sorry, just real quick, Jim, I wanted to also ask, because I'm seeing a lot of things coming up on the screen here. I wanted to ask you to maybe just give a little bit more information about the project visualization working group that you mentioned, and if you get into things like going over different types of software, pros and cons, or kind of helping with training or anything like that through that group.
We do talk about different softwares that we're using and the pros and cons of each one. I'm kind of the first in the group to use Blender, so I've been kind of sharing my experiences and lessons learned with that. So yeah, there have been some pros and there have been some cons there. So as far as looking at some of the other items in the list here,
training seems to be coming up quite a lot. That's second to
training
funding.
Where I wouldn't say I've like directly trained anyone through the group or at one of our meetings, but we had somebody do a presentation on how they used drone footage to create a 3D mesh that someone else then used to build a visualization from. So we haven't like directly done any training, but we all were kind of sharing sort of who knows what. So if I had a question about that, I have their email address. I can reach out and say, hey, can we set up a session? And like, can I learn more about that? So it's definitely been good to kind of get to know other people who may have tried different things that I haven't had time to try, and kind of share that knowledge.
And typically those software, they either have some sort of wiki or forum for, they may have training videos and things like that. And I guess I would encourage those of you who are interested in starting in design visualization or just interested in design visualization in general to reach out to Jim and maybe get involved in the visualization work group. So we are wrapping up our time. Thank you so much, Jim, for this session on project visualizations. It's time for our break. So stretch your legs, get a beverage. And when we come back after the break at 10 a.m., we'll be here with Zach Whitney and we'll be looking at do-it-yourself videos. So see you in 15 minutes.